In the remote wilds of Ash Hollow, Montana, reclusive Ahyoka Tayanita was about to make a choice that would alter her life forever. What began as a simple trek along a frozen creek took a shocking turn when she discovered 3 starving wolf pups shivering in the snow. Aya, a former wildlife photographer known for her intuition and patience, had no idea she was stepping into danger. Rescuing the pups would ignite 6 months of mysterious events, confrontations with shadowy forces, and a spiritual awakening that would forever change Ash Hollow. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind cut through the pines like a knife, and snow crunched under Tayanita's boots as she moved along the frozen creek. Her breath formed clouds in the cold Montana air, the river beside her half frozen, whispering secrets she wasn't yet ready to hear. She had sought this place for peace, for solitude. The mountains were her refuge after the death of Dakota, her partner, whose laughter once threaded through forests now silent in his absence. 6 years had passed, but the ache remained, lodged in her chest like a stubborn thorn. Aya paused, scanning the pale landscape. Tracks in the snow drew her attention. Small, clawed imprints, partially buried under drifting flakes. Her pulse quickened with cautious curiosity. Something had been here recently. Something alive. As she followed the trail, the hollow of the creek grew colder, and a faint whimper reached her ears, nearly drowned by the whispering wind. There, beneath an overturned log caked with frost, she found them. 3 wolf pups, frail, trembling, eyes wide with hunger and fear. One was pressed against the log, shivering so violently she thought it might freeze solid. Their fur was matted and thin, ribs showing beneath taut skin. Aya's heart clenched, guilt and longing knotting together. These little lives were fragile, abandoned, perhaps lost forever if she didn't act. Memories of Dakota's final expedition flickered behind her eyes, the way he had gripped her hand before the avalanche, the helplessness she had felt as the snow claimed him. Guilt that had never left her resurfaced with the sight of these pups. She couldn't leave them here. She couldn't turn away, not when instinct, compassion and grief tugged at her all at once. Kneeling in the snow, she whispered softly, "It's all right. I've got you." Her fingers hovered over the nearest pup, and it flinched, ears folding back, yet didn't bolt. The trust between human and wild was fragile, built in moments of patience and understanding. Aya worked quickly, fashioning a small blanket from her scarf and coat sleeves, wrapping the trembling bundle against her chest. She lifted it, feeling the pup's feeble heartbeat against her own. The others followed, coaxed gently into the warmth of her arms and coat. Back at her cabin, she cleared the corner near the hearth, arranging straw and blankets into a makeshift den. The pups curled together, huddling as if instinctually aware that this human presence might be the difference between life and death. Aya fed them scraps of meat she had kept for emergencies, noting their eagerness, the hollow pangs in their bellies that mirrored something deeper in herself, the emptiness Dakota's absence had left behind. As the fire crackled, Aya studied their faces, small, intelligent eyes glinting in the lamplight. She debated for hours whether to call authorities or leave them. The villagers had whispered warnings about Ash Hollow, about the vanished pack, about the accidents, about things that moved in the woods when no one was watching. But she couldn't. The choice was made without deliberation. Compassion outweighed caution. She would keep them. She would protect them. And in doing so, she stepped into a world that demanded more than survival. It demanded vigilance, empathy, and an understanding that not all danger was visible. Outside, the wind moaned through the pines, carrying the faint echo of something ancient. Aya shivered, not from cold but from the uncanny sensation that the mountains themselves were observing, waiting. She shook off the feeling and focused on the pups, who had nestled close to her, eyes fluttering closed in exhaustion. Tomorrow would require food, warmth, and more careful attention. Tonight, survival was enough. As she sat back, brushing snow from her coat and staring into the fire, Aya felt a subtle shift, a premonition, a stirring beneath the soil, a heartbeat not her own. It was small and fleeting, but unmistakable. The line between the natural and the otherworldly had begun to blur, and though she did not yet understand the consequences of her choice, Aya felt them pressing gently against her consciousness. For now, there was warmth, the rhythmic breathing of tiny lives, and the silent promise of vigilance. She allowed herself a small measure of relief, letting the weight of grief ease into purpose. In the wilderness of Ash Hollow, under the shadow of snow-laden pines and the distant roar of the creek, Aya knew her life had changed irreversibly. Compassion had drawn her into a narrative older than memory, and the pups, innocent and vulnerable, were her first step into the untamed mysteries that awaited. The night deepened, and the cabin settled into silence, punctuated only by the soft breathing of Ahuli, Chenoa, and Kitchi. Aya watched over them, a guardian of fragile lives, feeling the first twinges of awe and fear that the mountains had always inspired in those who dared to wander too close to their heart. Marcus's hand trembled slightly as he adjusted the strap on his satchel, the faint crack of twigs beneath his boots reminding him how isolated this part of Ash Hollow truly was. Wait, that wasn't Marcus. Aya's mind flickered back to the previous evening, to the warmth of her cabin and the 3 small bodies nestled against her in makeshift straw beds. Now, with the first light of dawn spilling across the frozen landscape, the reality of her choice pressed down more heavily than the weight of her winter coat. She had decided to keep the pups. She had chosen compassion over caution, and now she could feel the gravity of that decision settle around her shoulders. Aya crouched near the hearth, her fingers brushing a stray tuft of fur from Ahuli's matted coat. The pup's small, intelligent eyes blinked up at her, half-lidded with sleep. Chenoa stirred, shifting carefully to avoid disturbing Kitchi, who lay pressed to the warm patch of blanket she had fashioned for him. Each movement reminded Aya that she had a responsibility far greater than she had anticipated, a delicate balance between survival, nurturing, and understanding the mysteries she had already begun to glimpse. She rose slowly, crossing the cabin floor to inspect the crude pens she had built around the fire. They were rough, hastily constructed with salvaged planks and rope, but they would suffice for now. Aya moved methodically, adjusting the blankets, laying down small scraps of dried meat for the pups, and listening to the faint whispers of the wind threading through the cracks in the cabin walls. Every creak, every gust of cold air made her heart jump, a reminder that the mountains were alive, watchful. Even in her solitude, she was not entirely alone. Outside, the forest had begun to awaken under the pale winter sun. Snow clung stubbornly to branches, and the creek gurgled beneath a thin layer of ice. Aya scanned the horizon, her eyes tracing familiar paths, but a niggling unease tugged at the edges of her mind. Something was different. Something was watching. She shook her head, trying to banish the feeling. She was not a superstitious woman. Dakota's death had left little room for illusions, but the memory of the vanished pack whispered about in town, gnawed at her. Her thoughts were interrupted by Ahuli's tiny bark. The pup had ventured too close to the edge of the pen and teetered perilously over the blanket. Aya rushed forward, scooping him up before he could fall. His trust in her was evident in the way he pressed against her chest, tail wagging weakly. That moment, small, simple, tender, was a fleeting relief in a day already weighted with foreboding. Aya moved to Chenoa next, who had been quietly observing the boundaries of the cabin from the shadows. The cautious pup's eyes reflected wariness and intelligence, scanning the corners as if aware that the world beyond the walls was both fascinating and dangerous. Kitchi remained close to the fire, tail flicking in measured rhythm. Aya had begun to notice patterns in their behavior, subtle gestures, anticipatory movements that suggested these were no ordinary wolf pups. They were learning, communicating, and adapting far faster than any wild animals she had encountered. Hours passed in quiet observation. Aya fed the pups carefully, noting their growing coordination. Ahuli learned to balance his small body on the uneven straw. Chenoa approached the food cautiously, testing each piece before consuming it. Kitchi followed her every movement with unnerving attentiveness. It was a delicate dance of nurture and discovery, each action feeding not just their bodies, but their minds. Aya felt a swell of pride mixed with apprehension. They were thriving, but at what cost? By midday, Aya had completed the basic tasks of survival. She stepped outside, boots crunching in the frost, and surveyed the surrounding forest. Tracks crisscrossed the snow, some familiar, others strange and difficult to identify. Her eyes lingered on a pattern she could not place. Paw prints, yes, but far larger than any wolf's. And yet they carried the same deliberate pacing, the same calculated steps that she had begun to recognize in the pups. A chill traced her spine. Something else was here. Something unseen. The sound of approaching footsteps made her spin. Sheriff Tayan Toma Wikasa emerged from the tree line, his presence a reminder that the world beyond her cabin had not forgotten her choice. He was practical, grounded and cautious, and his Lakota heritage made him a man intimately familiar with the lore of Ash Hollow. He studied the cabin from a distance, his eyes narrowing not in suspicion, but concern. "Morning, Aya," he called, voice carrying over the frost-cracked earth. "You're up early." Aya gave a small nod, keeping her expression neutral. "Morning, Toma. Came to check the pups?" Toma's gaze softened, but the underlying tension remained. "You've got a brave heart. Or a foolish one. These woods, these mountains, they remember. They don't forgive easily. My grandfather..." He trailed off, eyes distant, reflecting on the vanished pack that had haunted Ash Hollow decades ago. "He disappeared here? Went looking for wolves like yours." Aya felt the familiar tug of grief tighten around her chest. She understood fear. She had lived with it for 6 years since Dakota's death. But she also understood choice, the deliberate act of compassion despite the risk. "I won't let them suffer," she said quietly, almost to herself. Tomas studied her, weighing the conviction in her voice. He had seen fear, courage, and stubbornness in equal measure in his years as sheriff, but there was something in Aya's quiet intensity that gave him pause. He nodded slowly. "Just be careful. This forest doesn't take kindly to those who don't respect it." After Toma left, Aya returned to the cabin, locking the door against the wind. The pups had grown restless, sensing her lingering tension. Ahuli nudged her hand. Chenoa watched with wide, attentive eyes, and Kitchi let out a soft whine. She settled onto the floor, letting them gather around her. In that circle of warmth, Aya felt a fragile equilibrium form, a blend of safety and unease. As evening approached, shadows stretched long across the cabin floor. A subtle movement caught Aya's eye. A flicker in the tree line, a shape moving with unnatural fluidity. She froze, heart hammering. The pups' ears pricked, and they rose as one, tails stiff, bodies taut with alertness. It was a silent acknowledgement that they sensed what she could not yet name. She rubbed her temples, willing herself to remain rational. Perhaps it was a deer, or a trick of the fading light. But the feeling persisted. The forest was alive in ways she had not fully comprehended. The hairs on her neck rose, and a shiver ran down her spine. She glanced at the pups, who now crouched low, their gaze fixed beyond the window. Ahuli barked once, a sharp, piercing sound, and the shadows seemed to recoil. Aya's intuition, always sharp, whispered warnings she could not ignore. The pups were not merely surviving. They were responding, communicating, anticipating. And whatever lingered in the forest, it was watching, learning, waiting. Night fell, and the cabin's interior glowed with the gentle light of the hearth. Aya fed the pups once more, noting their coordination, their subtle mimicry of human gestures, the way they seemed to understand her without words. She could not shake the feeling that they were different, extraordinary in ways that might soon demand more than she was prepared to give. Hours later, as she drifted to a fitful sleep on the floor beside them, Aya experienced the first vivid dream of Takoda. His voice, gentle and familiar, threaded through her subconscious. "Watch closely. The world beneath the snow is alive. Trust your instincts, Aya. They will guide you." She awoke with the memory lingering, a mixture of comfort and foreboding. Outside, the wind carried whispers through the trees. Somewhere in the darkness a howl echoed, long, mournful, and strangely resonant. The pup stirred, ears twitching, eyes darting toward the window. Aya held them close, heart pounding. Whatever haunted Ash Hollow, it had begun to make itself known, and she, in choosing compassion over caution, had drawn herself and the pups into its orbit. The night deepened, and Aya remained vigilant, watching the cabin's perimeter, listening to the forest's subtle murmurs. Her thoughts circled the warnings, the legends, and the haunting absence of those who had vanished before her. Yet even as fear curled at her spine, determination anchored her. She had chosen this path, and whatever lay beyond the threshold of ordinary understanding, she would meet it with courage, with care, and with the growing realization that the pups, Ahuli, Chenoa and Kitchi, were her bridge to something older, something larger, something that demanded respect. Morning would come, bringing new tasks, new observations, and the first hints of the extraordinary. Aya tucked herself closer to the sleeping pups, eyes scanning the windowed shadows, aware that Ash Hollow had begun to stir, and that the boundary between the natural and the supernatural was already thinning. In that fragile, quiet hour, Aya understood a fundamental truth. The forest was alive. The wolves were more than they seemed, and she, drawn by grief and compassion, had unwittingly become part of a story that stretched beyond her lifetime. And as the snow drifted silently against the cabin walls, she felt the first pulse of anticipation, the slow, insistent thrum of something ancient awakening in Ash Hollow. The mountains waited, and so did the wolves. The days after that first long night passed in a strange rhythm, both familiar and disquieting. Aya moved through her cabin with practiced efficiency, feeding, cleaning, and observing the pups, Ahuli, Chenoa, and Kitchi, who had grown stronger and sharper with every passing day. But their growth was unsettling. Ahuli now bounded to her side at the mere tilt of her head. Chenoa followed her movements with uncanny attentiveness, and Kitchi's protective instincts seemed almost human. Each interaction carried an unspoken intelligence, a prescience that defied the norms of the natural world. Aya's hands shook as she stroked their thickening fur. She had never encountered anything like this, and a small, persistent whisper in the back of her mind cautioned her to pay attention. The wind cut across the frozen clearing outside the cabin, bringing with it sounds that weren't entirely animal. There were rustlings that suggested stealth, shadows that moved against the pattern of falling snow. Aya froze mid-step, ears straining to detect movement. The pups stiffened with her, each instinctively aligning their gaze to the same unseen point beyond the trees. She had begun to notice a strange synchronicity. Their behavior mirrored something she could not yet see. The sense of being watched, once faint, had become insistent, almost deliberate. Aya left the cabin briefly, carrying scraps of food to the outer pen. The snow crunched under her boots, the only sounds in the still morning air. And then she saw it, a shadow, long and massive, slipping between the trunks of pine and spruce, moving with a purpose no deer or elk could match. Her heart leapt, a surge of fear tempered by awe. The pups reacted instantly, bounding to the edge of the pen and growling in low, calculated tones. There was a precision in their movements, a clarity of understanding that went beyond instinct. She called to them gently, and Ahuli paused mid-leap, ears cocked. Chenoa followed her signal, and Kitchi, ever vigilant, fell silent at her gesture. Aya's mind raced. The legends of Ash Hollow had always been whispered about in the village. Wolves that weren't merely wolves, spirits of the forest, remnants of an old mining disaster that had scarred both the land and its people. She had dismissed them as tales meant to scare children, yet the evidence mounted. Claw marks, too large to belong to the pups, had appeared on her porch, and livestock had begun to vanish under mysterious circumstances. And now there was this shadow, moving like a predator with knowledge beyond natural comprehension. Her thoughts were interrupted by a distant howl, low and mournful, reverberating through the forest. It was haunting, resonant, almost sentient in its tone. The pups whined and circled, ears flat against their heads, bodies coiled like springs. Aya's pulse raced. She had to act, yet every instinct told her to wait, to observe. She had never felt so acutely the thin line separating herself from forces she could not yet define. Days later, Ahyoka arrived in Ash Hollow, her SUV crunching across the icy dirt road before coming to a cautious stop near Aya's cabin. Ahyoka was a wildlife biologist sent to the area to study wolf populations, and though she approached her work scientifically, she was open-minded, curious, and attentive to anomalies. Aya had met few outsiders in months, and the sudden arrival of someone with rational purpose was both comforting and nerve-wracking. Ms. Tayanita, Ahyoka called, emerging from the vehicle. Her breath hung in the cold air like faint mist, eyes scanning the cabin and the surrounding woods. "I've been sent to investigate the wolves reported in this area. I hope I'm not intruding." Aya studied her carefully. The woman was professional, her demeanor confident, but her gaze flickered toward the outer pen, drawn to the pups. Aya felt an almost instinctual mistrust, tempered by the awareness that she could not hide what was happening. "You're not intruding," Aya said, her voice steady. "But you should know, these aren't ordinary wolves. There's something unusual about them." Ahyoka smiled faintly, a mixture of amusement and curiosity. "That's why I'm here. I've seen genetic anomalies before, and I'm prepared to consider the unexpected." "Show me what you got." Aya guided Ahyoka to the pen, where the pups greeted them with surprising awareness. Ahuli leapt playfully but stopped short when Aya held up a hand. Genoa watched intently, head tilting as if analyzing Ahyoka. Kitchi pressed close to Aya's legs, protective yet poised. Ahyoka knelt slowly, extending her hand to the pups. They did not approach blindly. Instead, they circled her, sniffing and studying her movements with deliberate care. This is extraordinary," Ahyoka murmured. "They're communicating in ways that suggest advanced cognition. Their growth patterns are abnormal, rapid but controlled. I've never seen anything like it." Aya nodded, a mix of pride and apprehension swelling in her chest. "They weren't always like this. I found them starving by the frozen creek. Something has changed them. I don't know what." Ahyoka's eyes flicked to the surrounding forest. "The environment here has history. Past mining operations, reports of vanished packs. You might be witnessing the residual effects of something long buried. Genetic mutation alone could not account for the behavior I'm seeing. There's something else." Aya shivered. The cold outside mirrored the chill threading through her thoughts. She had sensed it for weeks, a presence beyond explanation, alive beneath the snow and the trees, watching, waiting. That evening, the phenomena escalated. Aya had returned to the cabin after checking traps for food, only to find claw marks etched deep into the wooden frame of her porch. The marks were too precise, too large for the pups, and arranged with intent. Her pulse quickened as a low growl resonated from the forest, chilling her to the bone. Ahuli barked sharply, Genoa bristled, and Kitchi growled in unison. The pups were alert in ways no normal animal should be. Aya's mind flashed to Takoda, his presence lingering in memory like a warm, impossible hand on her shoulder. "Trust your instincts, Aya. They will guide you." She did, instinctively moving to secure the cabin doors and windows. Outside, movement flitted between the trees, swift, deliberate, and unlike any creature she had ever encountered. Ahyoka arrived late that night, having stayed at the nearby ranger station to gather equipment. She found Aya pacing, eyes wide, the pups circling anxiously at her feet. "What did you see?" Ahyoka asked softly. Aya turned, her face pale, voice trembling only slightly. "Something large, something intelligent. The pups. They reacted before I even knew it was there. And the tracks outside, they don't match anything natural. I think there's more in these woods than we realize." Ahyoka knelt, examining the snow. "These prints, they're irregular. The gait, the depth, the spacing. None of it aligns with natural wolves, and yet there's order to it. Intelligence." Aya swallowed hard, feeling a mix of fear and awe. "Do you believe me? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Makia's gaze met hers. I don't know what to believe yet, but I know enough to say you're not imagining it. Something is happening here, Aya. Something extraordinary. Night pressed in, the wind howling across the frozen creek and threading through the pines. Aya huddled with the pups near the hearth, the shadows dancing across the walls, stretching unnaturally, forming shapes that suggested motion and intent. Oiguli's ears twitched constantly. Chinoa's eyes darted to unseen corners, and Kichi remained alert, a silent guardian. Aya felt the weight of responsibility pressing down with an intensity she had not anticipated. The pups were no longer merely dependent on her. They were entwined with a force she could not yet name, a presence older than memory and wilder than understanding. In the dead hours of the night, she awoke to a sound that froze her blood, a howl, low and mournful, resonating through the valley with a clarity and intelligence that seemed almost human. The pups stirred, pressing close, ears flat, bodies tense. Aya rose cautiously, peering through the frost-lined windows into the darkness. A figure moved between the trees, a massive shadowed form, luminous in its subtle motion, shifting with a grace that defied natural law. Her breath caught. Waya, the spirit alpha wolf, whose presence she had only glimpsed in fleeting glimpses and legends, was here. The pups whined softly, circling her, recognizing the figure even before she did. Their responses were coordinated, intelligent, and deliberate. Aya felt the first twinge of understanding. They were not merely wolves, and this was not merely a forest. Ash Hollow was alive with a consciousness older than the mountains themselves, and the boundary between natural and supernatural was beginning to dissolve. Aya sat back, heart-pounding, and allowed herself to marvel through fear. She knew instinctively that the coming days would demand more than survival. They would require understanding, intuition, and courage beyond what she had ever summoned. She looked at the pups, now dozing fitfully, and whispered, "We'll face it together. Whatever comes, we face it together." Outside, the wind whispered, carrying the echo of howls, and Aya felt a profound shift in the forest around her. Ash Hollow had awakened, and she had already taken her first steps into its hidden heart. The morning after the shadowy encounter, the mountains seemed heavier, the snow-laden pines bowing under some invisible pressure. Aya moved carefully through the cabin, her every step measured, her senses alert. Kichi, normally the most relaxed of the pups, prowled the edges of the room, growling lowly at the corners where the shadows pooled unnaturally. Aya's stomach tightened, an intuitive dread she had learned to trust. The forest was stirring again, and this time it was personal. By mid-morning she noticed Kichi was missing. The other two pups, Ahuli and Chinoa, circled the cabin, whining softly. Aya's heart lurched. Kichi had never wandered far from the cabin since she rescued them. The sense of unease that had been growing over the past weeks surged into sharp fear. Grabbing her parka and boots, she followed their tracks into the snow, every crunch echoing too loudly in the still air. The trail led to the frozen creek where she had first found them. There, near an outcropping of ice-crusted rocks, the tracks diverged, heading toward a narrow ravine. She traced the path with growing horror. The prints didn't match a pup's gait. They were larger, heavier, and spaced in a way that suggested Kichi had been carried or guided by something far beyond her understanding. Aya's mind raced. She remembered the legends of Ash Hollow, the pack that vanished decades ago during a mining accident. The whispers of spirits and transformation, the old stories of wolves that were not merely animals, but guardians and avengers. And now, here was evidence that the past had never truly ended. It had only waited. Hours passed in a frantic search, the snow biting through her gloves, her breath rising in misty clouds. She called Kichi's name, her voice tight with panic, but only silence answered. Then in a narrow clearing beneath the skeletal pines, she found signs that made her blood run cold, claw marks deep into the snow and bark of the trees, fur tufts that glowed faintly in the morning light, and faint footprints that weren't Kichi's. They were something else entirely. Aya sank to her knees. touching the snow and fur with trembling hands. Her mind flicked to Takoda, the ghostly presence of her lost partner that had guided her through peril before. "He's not here this time," she whispered. "I have to do this myself." Her pulse quickened as she scanned the clearing, and there it was again, a massive shadow slipping between the trees. This time she saw more clearly, a hulking wolf, larger than any natural wolf, fur dark and shifting like smoke. Eyes glowing faintly amber. Wire, the alpha spirit, regarded her silently, then turned, disappearing deeper into the forest. Aya's stomach twisted. She had known instinctively that the wolves were more than mere animals, but the reality of it was overwhelming. Kichi was part of that secret now, drawn into a world Aya had only glimpsed in fleeting shadows and whispered howls. Aya returned to the cabin with Ahuli and Shanoa, mind racing with possibilities. She knew she needed help, someone who could understand not just the wolves, but the unnatural forces that bound them. Makia Keita's arrival the day before had been fortuitous. Aya retrieved her sat phone and dialed the wildlife biologist, voice tight with urgency. "Makia," she said, trying to keep calm. "It's Kichi. She's gone. I followed her trail, and it led to something big, something unnatural. I need your help." Makia's voice was steady, professional, but carried a hint of concern. "I'll be there as soon as I can. Bring Ahuli and Shanoa. Keep them contained until I arrive. And Aya, trust your instincts. They're telling you something important." Within hours, Makia arrived, bringing equipment to track the pups' unusual movements. They studied the tracks together. The size, depth, and spacing of the prints, the tufts of fur and splinters of bark. "These are anomalous," Makia said, kneeling to examine them. "There's intelligence in the patterns. And look, these fur samples show accelerated growth markers, mutations consistent with environmental radiation, or something spiritual. Whatever happened to this pack decades ago left a mark that continues to manifest." Aya nodded, shivering despite her coat. "I always sensed the mountain was alive. The legends, the disappearances, they weren't just stories. They were warnings. Kichi is out there and so is Waya. I think they're connected. She's not missing by chance." Makia's eyes softened as she considered the scope. "Aya, we're dealing with a phenomenon that defies pure biology. I've studied wolf behavior my whole career, but this is something else. We need to find her and understand what we're dealing with carefully. The last thing we want is to provoke whatever force is out there." As the two women prepared for a cautious search, Sheriff Tayan Toma Wikasa arrived, summoned by Aya's earlier calls and the trail of strange activity in the area. Toma's expression was a mix of concern and cautious skepticism. "Aya," he said, surveying the snow-covered clearing, "I've heard stories, sure, but you're telling me the wolves, or whatever they are interacting with Kichi. And you think something spiritual is involved?" Aya met his gaze steadily. "I've lived in these mountains long enough to know the difference between natural behavior and something other. Kichi was drawn out there, and whatever drew her is Waya, the alpha spirit of the old pack," Toma exhaled, running a hand over his face. "My grandfather. He disappeared chasing wolves back in the day. Everyone thought it was a mining accident. Maybe it was more than that. If you're right, we need to be smart. I'll help, but we move carefully." Together, the trio tracked the elusive signs deeper into the mountains. The snow became patchy as they ascended, the air thinner and the forest quieter, save for the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. Ahuli and Shanoa remained close to Aya, eyes wide and attentive, responding to unseen cues as if they understood the stakes. It was near an abandoned mining tunnel, half collapsed and glistening with frost, that they found the first definitive evidence of Kichi's path. Scratch marks etched into rock walls, glowing faintly in the diffused light. The markings were deliberate, symbols of unknown origin, their arrangement suggesting communication. Aya pressed her palm to the cold stone, feeling a vibration, a pulse beneath the surface, resonant and living. Makia's voice was quiet, awed. "Aya, this energy, it's unlike anything I've measured. It's alive and it's intelligent." Aya swallowed, nodding. This is what I feared. The old pack wasn't destroyed, they were transformed. Something ancient is here, beneath the mountain, shaping them. And Kitchi, she's part of it now. A sudden howl echoed through the cavernous tunnel entrance, resonant and chilling. The hairs on Aya's arms rose as she realized the sound carried intention, not randomness. Wire. She stepped forward cautiously, eyes sweeping the shadows. From the darkness, Kitchi emerged, her fur thicker, eyes brighter, and posture radiating a confidence and intelligence that was unnerving. The reunion was swift, yet tense. Kitchi did not rush into Aya's arms. She paused, regarding her with a gaze that suggested recognition, but also an awareness of something greater. Aya knelt slowly, voice soft. "It's okay, Kitchi. You're safe." Kitchi approached with measured steps, brushing against Aya before returning to the tunnel's mouth, ears perked and alert. The other figures emerged then, silhouettes moving with fluid precision. Adult wolves, transformed, larger and more imposing than any natural creature, encircled the humans. Wire stepped forward, massive and ethereal, eyes glowing faintly amber. The alpha's gaze held Aya in place, weighing her intentions. Aya's breath caught. She had always known compassion would come with consequences, but the scope of these consequences was overwhelming. Wire's presence radiated authority, intelligence, and power that defied the laws of the natural world. Aya extended her hands slowly, palms open, a gesture of trust. The moment stretched, taut with tension and understanding. Kitchi remained at her side, signaling acceptance, while the other transformed wolves remained still, observing, testing. Aya felt a strange calm settle over her, the pull of ancestral energy threading through her veins. She sensed Takoda in the space between heartbeats, whispering guidance and caution. "Respect the mountain, respect the force, and trust your instincts." Wire tilted its head slightly, letting out a low, melodic growl, a sound that vibrated in the chest like a living drum. Aya understood, intuitively. The wolf's transformation was tied to the ancient energy beneath the mountain, a force that had waited decades to assert itself again. Kitchi, like Ahuli and Shinoa, had become part of this lineage, bridging the gap between human empathy and wild instinct. Between past and present, Aya exhaled slowly, feeling a mixture of fear, awe, and acceptance. She knew the days ahead would demand courage, intelligence, and unwavering intuition. The line between human and wolf, natural and supernatural, had been blurred, and she was standing squarely in its middle. Makya and Toma flanked her, both visibly awed and cautious. "We have to understand it," Makya whispered. "Document it, but also survive it. This is living history, Aya, and it's dangerous." Aya nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. The pups, now mature beyond expectation, moved beside her, attentive and loyal. Wire watched, the alpha's form radiant and silent, a guardian of something much older than any of them. As the group prepared to retreat from the tunnel, Aya cast one last glance at the transformed wolves. She understood, finally, that Ash Hollow's secrets were alive, patient, and waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. She had crossed a threshold, and the mountain had accepted her, not as an intruder, but as a participant in its ancient living story. The wind rose, carrying with it the scent of pine, snow, and something indescribably wild. Aya felt the forest's pulse beneath her boots, the weight of the mountain's memory pressing against her chest. She understood that the journey ahead would test her limits, push her courage, and demand sacrifices. But she also knew, in the quiet certainty of the wilderness, that she was ready, and somewhere. Deep within the shadows of Ash Hollow, Wire observed, patient and watchful, the first of many lessons about trust, instinct, and the cost of compassion already unfolding. The mountain had awakened, and with it, Aya's true test had begun. The air was sharper here, carrying the metallic scent of frost and pine resin, a mixture that sharpened Aya's senses. Dawn was a fragile line of light over the peaks of Ash Hollow, the kind that made the snow gleam like scattered diamonds. Aya adjusted the straps of her pack and tightened her scarf, her eyes scanning the forest floor as Ahuli and Chenoa padded silently beside her. Kitchi had returned fully to her, but the pup's fur shimmered faintly, bristling with a tension that made Aya's chest tighten. The mountain was alive in a way she had never felt before. Sheriff Tayanita Wikasa followed a few paces behind, rifle slung casually across his back, eyes trained for unnatural disturbances. His Lakota instincts prickled at every rustle in the underbrush. Ahyoka, notebook and digital equipment in hand, moved methodically, cataloging tracks, strange markings and anomalies in the snow. Despite her scientific mind, her pace slowed. The forest had a weight that pressed against her rationality, as if demanding reverence before it would reveal its secrets. Aya led the group along a faint game trail that climbed the northern ridge, following tracks she had identified the previous day, tracks that suggested Kitchi had interacted with something far. The forest seemed to watch as they passed, shadows shifting subtly with their movements. Kitchi, Ahuli, and Chenoa moved beside Aya with a quiet confidence that mirrored her own growing resolve. Somewhere, deep in the mountains, Waya's eyes lingered on the group, approving yet watchful. Aya exhaled, the crisp air filling her lungs. The confrontation had passed, but the mountain's challenge was only beginning. She was ready to face it, and in the silence, the ancient energy beneath Ash Hollow pulsed steadily, alive, patient, and eternal. Snow crunched beneath Aya's boots as she moved through the northern ridge of Ash Hollow, the early morning light casting long, pale shadows across the frozen ground. The mountain seemed quieter than usual, almost expectant, as if it were holding its breath. Kitchi padded silently beside her, ears flicking toward distant sounds only she could perceive. Ahuli and Chenoa followed a few steps behind, occasionally darting to inspect unusual tracks or scents, their intelligence and awareness growing daily. Aya's chest tightened with a mixture of pride and unease. Their evolution was breathtaking, but unnerving. Ahyoka was trailing slightly behind, hunched over her field equipment, adjusting sensors and jotting down observations in her notebook. She had set up environmental monitors across the ridge to track the energy fluctuations Aya had sensed during their previous encounter with Waya. So far, the readings were unprecedented: electromagnetic anomalies, temperature shifts and traces of rare mineral radiation, all concentrated along the ridges and deep forested valleys of the mountain. Sheriff Tayanita Wikasa moved with careful precision, scanning the tree line, rifle slung but ready. He'd grown increasingly respectful of Aya's intuition, yet he remained grounded in his duty to protect the local community. His mind churned with questions. How much of what Aya reported was real, and how much was a manifestation of her grief or imagination? The disappearance of her partner, Takoda, haunted her still, and Toma wondered if the mountain's secrets were entwined with the emotional weight she carried. Aya paused at a clearing, watching the sun glint off the icy branches. The silence was almost too complete. She crouched to inspect claw marks on a snow-laden tree, wide, deep, and not quite human, not quite wolf. The markings radiated an energy she could feel in her bones, like an echo of the mountain itself. "These are recent," Aya murmured. "They didn't come from the pups, and they didn't come from any natural predator in the area." Makia approached, eyes widening as she examined the marks. "The size, the depth, combined with the energy readings, it's consistent with the transformed wolves we saw with Waya. But these are deliberate, directional, intentional, not random." Aya nodded, a chill crawling up her spine. "They're testing the boundaries. The mountain is alive, and it's measuring how we respond." Toma shifted uneasily. "Testing or warning?" Aya's gaze swept over the ridge. "Maybe both. Whatever Waya is, it's patient, but it's aware." She inhaled deeply, centering herself. "We have to be careful, but we can't retreat." "Not now." The tension in the air intensified over the next few days. Livestock in the valley below began disappearing again, more brazenly than before, and the townsfolk whispered of the wolves growing bolder. Aya's cabin became a hub of activity. She and the pups moved with a constant alertness. Makia documented every anomaly, and Toma mediated between Aya's warnings and the villagers' fears. At one point, Aya found Chenoa sitting atop a small ridge, gazing into the forest with unnerving stillness. The pup's amber eyes reflected something ancient, almost human, in their perception. Aya crouched beside her. "Chenoa, what do you see?" she asked softly. Chenoa tilted her head, ears flicking toward a distant grove. Then she barked once, a sharp, deliberate bark, almost communicative. Aya's stomach tightened. The pup was signaling, warning, observing. The intelligence in these wolves had surpassed instinct. It was a conscious awareness of danger and strategy. Makia, observing from below, muttered under her breath, "It's coordination, communication. This isn't behavior I've ever documented in wild wolves. Their cognitive development, accelerated, almost adaptive. They're bridging the gap between human understanding and instinct." Toma's gaze followed the direction of Chenoa's focus. "There! Movement," he whispered, raising his hand to caution. Shadowed figures shifted among the trees, too large and deliberate for deer or elk. Aya's heart pounded. "Stay calm," she instructed. "They're watching, just like we're watching them." The forest responded in subtle shifts, the rustle of branches, the snap of ice beneath heavy paws. Then, without warning, a figure, a massive, transformed wolf, stepped into the clearing, its fur glimmering with streaks of light, eyes reflecting centuries of intelligence. It was Waya, or one of its emissaries. The pups froze, recognizing the presence instantly, bodies tense but controlled. Aya stood slowly, hands raised in non-threatening gestures. "We mean no harm," she called, voice steady. "We're here to understand, not to fight." Waya's gaze swept over the group, assessing, measuring, acknowledging. The alpha's aura carried both authority and caution. Aya could feel the mountain's pulse through the wolf, a rhythm that resonated with her own heartbeat. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself, letting the mountain's energy flow through her. The figure retreated slightly, circling them, before vanishing into the tree line. Aya exhaled, tension releasing in waves. "They're testing us," she said. Makia nodded, jotting down observations. "Every move we make, they measure. This is not aggression, it's boundary setting." Toma remained wary. "We're visitors here, Aya. The mountain owns this place, and it decides how we interact with it." Aya's gaze softened, resting on the pups who mirrored her alertness and respect. "Then we respect it. That's all we can do." Later that evening, Aya gathered the group near the cabin's hearth. Snow fell in heavy curtains outside, muffling the forest into quiet isolation. Ahuli, Chenoa, and Kichi nestled against her legs, their warmth grounding her. Makia sipped tea, notebook open but untouched for a moment, reflecting on the day's events. Toma, silent, polished his rifle, but kept glancing toward the darkened windows, anticipating movement. Aya spoke softly, addressing the unspoken tension. "They're not like ordinary wolves, and this mountain, there's a spirit here, Waya, the pups. They're connected to it, and so are we now." Toma's expression hardened. "And the town? The farmers? If they see these wolves taking livestock, they'll act, shoot, trap, whatever it takes. We can't protect both the mountain and the people without consequences." Aya's hands clenched briefly. "I know, but compassion doesn't come without cost. We have to find a way to balance it, or we risk losing everything. The pups, the mountain, maybe even the town." Makia added, "From a scientific perspective, the anomaly is unprecedented. But that doesn't give us a free pass to interfere recklessly. If the mountain is responding to us, then any action we take has repercussions. We have to think carefully, ethically about each step." The conversation lingered, heavy with moral tension. Aya realized the stakes had expanded beyond survival or curiosity. They had become a test of judgment, loyalty, and the ethics of intervention. Her compassion, which had once been her guiding light, now demanded discipline, insight, and courage. The next day, the mountain delivered a harsher lesson. Aya awoke to find signs of a struggle near the cabin. Claw marks on the walls, traces of blood in the snow, and a partially torn fence that once protected the livestock. The pups growled low, their bodies stiff and alert, communicating tension that Aya could feel in her chest. Makia hurried outside, instruments in hand. "The energy readings are spiking," she said, voice tight with apprehension. "Whatever is interacting with the mountain right now. It's active, aggressive even, though calculated." Tomar surveyed the scene, his jaw tight. This isn't just testing anymore. Something or someone is pushing boundaries. And if the townspeople see this, they'll panic. Aya knelt by the snow, tracing the footprints left by massive paws. Her breath fogged in the icy air as a realization struck her. The mountain was not merely testing them. It was warning them. Their actions, their choices, their loyalty to the pups, and their respect for Waya's domain, all were under scrutiny. Aya rose, her voice firm. "We respond with respect. We don't fight unless forced. We observe, we protect, and we adapt. That's our only chance to maintain balance." The pups acknowledged her words, their eyes reflecting a mixture of instinct and understanding. Even Kitchi, who had always been fiercely protective, relaxed slightly, sensing Aya's clarity of purpose. Makia recorded every detail, every anomaly, but her face betrayed a dawning understanding. The mountain's energy was not hostile, it was sentient, testing the limits of those who dared to intervene, demanding accountability for compassion and stewardship. Tomar shook his head, muttering under his breath, "Never thought I'd see the day. Wolves teaching humans ethics." Aya smiled faintly, though her heart was heavy. "Not teaching, Toma, guiding, and only if we're willing to listen." That night, Aya had a vision. Takoda appeared, ethereal yet comforting, standing beside the pups who slept curled around her legs. "You're at the threshold, Aya," he said softly. "The mountain measures the heart, not the hand. Your compassion brought you here, but your courage and judgment will define what comes next. Protect what is innocent, respect what is powerful, and never forget, the cost of compassion is often unseen until it demands payment." Shuya awoke with a start, the vision lingering like the fading glow of twilight. She felt a renewed resolve, understanding that the mountain's tests would not cease. Her bond with the pups, her responsibility to Waya, and her duty to the people below were intertwined in ways she could not yet fully comprehend. She rose quietly, stepping outside into the still night. Snow fell silently, muffling the world in white. The ridge loomed above, dark and eternal. Somewhere deep within, Waya watched. Aya could feel the pulse of the mountain in her chest, a rhythm that demanded respect, courage, and unwavering loyalty. The future was uncertain, the path ahead treacherous, but Aya's resolve had solidified. She would protect the pups, she would honor Waya's guidance, and she would face the cost of her compassion, whatever it might be. As the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the distant echo of a wolf's howl, Aya whispered to herself, "We're ready. We'll earn their trust, and we'll protect what matters." Together, the mountains seemed to acknowledge her vow, a subtle tremor passing through the snow-laden ground. In Ash Hollow, the boundary between human and spirit was fragile, but for now, Aya and her allies had earned a measure of harmony, even if only temporary, and somewhere, hidden in the shadows of the ridge, Waya waited, patient, observant, and eternal. The morning fog clung to Ash Hollow like a living veil, curling through the jagged ridges and settling in the hollows between snow-laden pines. Aya pulled her coat tighter, the chill seeping through her gloves as she led the small expedition toward the cavern mouth. Kitchi and Ahuli flanked her, Chinoa moving slightly ahead with an air of quiet vigilance, alert to every whisper of the mountain. Makia adjusted her pack, carrying portable sensors and data collection equipment, while Toma's rifle rested over his shoulder, eyes scanning every shadowed crevice along the forest floor. The entrance loomed ahead, a dark gash in the mountainside, partially hidden by twisted firs and drifts of ice. From inside came a low hum, almost imperceptible, vibrating against Aya's bones, resonating in rhythm with the mountain's heartbeat. The pups stopped, ears pricked, growls low but controlled. They were wary, respectful, and yet eager, as if aware that beyond the mouth lay the heart of the mountain's secret. Aya swallowed against a rising tide of awe and trepidation. "This is it," she murmured. "Whatever Waya is guarding. Whatever transformed the pack. It's inside." Makia stepped close. "The energy readings are off the charts. We're about to witness something completely outside known science." Toma's gaze lingered on the dark opening. "Or something that's been hiding here for decades, waiting for the right time. Be ready for anything." Asha took a deep breath and led the group forward. The air inside was warmer than the frozen exterior, charged with a subtle vibration that made her hair stand on end. Crystals embedded in the cavern walls reflected the dim light, scattering spectral patterns across the floor. The cavern was immense, expanding far beyond the mountain's surface contour, its ceiling lost in shadow. The pups moved instinctively, navigating the jagged terrain with remarkable confidence. Ahuli sniffed ahead, alerting Aya to small tremors beneath their feet. Chanoa's gaze tracked the flickering glow of crystals, ears rotating like radar to catch unseen sounds. Gitchi stayed close to Aya, protective yet curious, ready to act at the first hint of danger. The deeper they went, the more the cavern revealed its power. Pools of water shimmered with iridescent colors, reflecting shapes that weren't always there. Strange runes etched into the rock centuries ago glowed faintly with phosphorescent light. Aya's fingers brushed over one. It pulsed under her touch, warmth radiating through her palm. Makia crouched to scan the wall. These markings, they're a combination of natural mineral deposits and symbols, almost like a map. Energy flows along these lines, almost directed, purposeful. "It's guiding us deeper," Toma frowned. "Or it's a warning. Something tells me we shouldn't underestimate what lives here." Aya nodded, feeling the weight of his caution. "We're not intruders, Toma. We're guests. If we remember how to behave." A low growl echoed from deeper within the cavern, resonating in harmony with the hum that coursed through the walls. The pups stiffened, their bodies taut with awareness. Ahuli's ears swiveled, Chanoa's eyes narrowed, and Kitchi let out a protective bark, small but firm. Then from the shadows emerged Waya. The alpha's fur shimmered with the same spectral light as the crystals, eyes glowing with ancient intelligence. Aya froze, the pulse in her chest sinking with the wolf's presence. Waya was massive, majestic, terrifying, yet not aggressive. It moved with deliberate grace, circling the group, inspecting, measuring. Asha held out a hand, palm open. "We come in peace," she whispered. "We want to understand, not interfere." Waya's gaze met hers, and in that moment the world shifted. Aya felt herself standing at the threshold between human perception and the mountain's deep consciousness. Images flashed in her mind. The mining accident decades ago, the transformation of the wolves, ancestral spirits guiding and protecting. Takoda's face among them. Takoda's voice echoed softly in her memory, blending with the cavern's hum. "Trust your heart, Aya. Respect the power, or you'll lose more than you think." The alpha wolf circled, stopping near Chanoa, who crouched in a low, respectful stance. The connection was immediate and profound. Aya realized that the pups' accelerated intelligence and empathy were linked directly to Waya's energy. Their bond was not merely emotional, it was spiritual, ancestral, and transformative. They moved deeper, the cavern narrowing into a series of tunnels and chambers. Stalactites dripped slow, crystalline tears into the pools below. Aya felt the energy intensifying, vibrating through the rock and into her bones. Gitchi led the way, ears twitching, nose to the ground, signaling an unseen presence ahead. Suddenly, a chamber opened, vast and awe-inspiring. In the center, adult wolves stood, transformed by the mountain's spiritual energy, their forms both wolf and ethereal. Some shimmered with a faint humanoid outline, eyes reflecting centuries of intelligence and pain. Waya approached them, nudging a few forward to acknowledge Aya and her companions. Aya stepped forward cautiously. We don't want to harm you. We want to understand. We want balance." One of the transformed wolves tilted its head, studying her. Its gaze was penetrating, assessing her intentions, her heart, her soul. The air hummed louder, as if the mountain itself was listening. Makia whispered, awed. The transformation? Their bridging species, maybe consciousness itself. Their intelligence, it's beyond anything documented. Tomas swallowed hard. And dangerous if provoked. Be careful, Aya. Aya nodded, heart steadying. I will. We're here to respect, to coexist, to protect. The pups approached the transformed wolves without fear, communicating in gestures, growls, and body language that Aya could feel rather than hear. It was a dialogue, instinctive yet deliberate. Aya guided the pups closer, nodding imperceptibly. Aya felt a surge of hope and fear. Hope that understanding was possible, fear of the consequences if they failed. Then, without warning, a tremor shook the cavern. Rock shifted, ice cracked, and a low rumble reverberated from the depths. Aya grabbed Kitchi, steadying herself, while Makia and Toma braced against the walls. The transformed wolves leaped, moving with impossible speed and precision. It was not aggression. It was a defensive demonstration, a test. Aya's pulse quickened. She could feel the mountain's energy demanding recognition, demanding respect. She held out her hands, voice steady. We respect you. We will not harm you. The Alpha paused, Waya's gaze locking with hers, and then slowly the wolves receded, forming a protective perimeter around the chamber. The tremor subsided, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Aya exhaled, sweat mingling with the cold. Makia, wide-eyed, whispered, They understand you. They're testing your intentions, your loyalty, your courage. If we had acted impulsively, it could have gone very differently. Toma exhaled, finally lowering his rifle. I don't know if I've ever seen anything like this in my life. Respect, yes, but fear too. The mountain has its rules. Aya knelt, letting the pups surround her, their warmth grounding her. We're here to protect, to learn, to respect. That's all. We'll not overstep. We'll not interfere. For hours they remained in the chamber, observing, interacting, and communicating in subtle ways. Aya began to perceive the rhythm of the cavern, the pulse of the spiritual energy, and the ancient intelligence that guided Waya and the transformed wolves. She realized the mountain was not hostile. It was sentient, testing the integrity and heart of those who dared enter its domain. Takoda's presence returned, comforting yet firm. You're doing well, Aya. You must balance courage with humility, compassion with judgment. This is the true test, Aya nodded, absorbing the lesson. She had come seeking understanding. But the mountain demanded more, discernment, empathy, and unwavering loyalty to the innocent, the pups, the transformed wolves, and the natural world itself. As night fell within the cavern, ethereal light from the crystals illuminated the chamber. Aya, Makia, and Toma settled near a glowing pool. The pups curled at their feet. Waya and the transformed wolves watched from the shadows, guardians and judges, patient and eternal. Aya whispered softly to the Alpha, her voice carrying the weight of promise and responsibility. We will protect them. We will honor this place. We will be worthy of your trust. Waya's eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light, met hers. A low, reverberating growl filled the chamber, not of threat, but of acknowledgement. The mountain's heartbeat slowed, aligning with Aya's own, signaling a fragile but profound connection, a truce, a mentorship, a beginning. As the group prepared to leave, Aya felt the enormity of what lay ahead. The mountain's power was immense, the spiritual legacy of Ash Hollow, deep and complex. But she had tasted its truth, felt the pulse of its energy, and recognized her place within it. The descent back toward the cavern mouth was quiet, contemplative. The pups moved ahead, agile and confident, guided by instincts intertwined with Waya's energy. Makia's notebook was filled with data that no ordinary science could fully explain, yet her understanding had deepened. Toma, stoic as ever, remained vigilant, now tempered by awe and respect. Aya lingered a moment at the mouth of the cavern, the wind carrying the scent of snow and stone. She looked back at the labyrinth of tunnels, at the pools that shimmered with unearthly light, and at the silhouettes of the transformed wolves disappearing into shadow. She whispered a vow to herself, to the pups, to Waya, and to the mountain itself. I will protect what is innocent. I will honor what is ancient. And I will face the cost of compassion, whatever it may be. Ash Hollow exhaled around her, the wind rustling through the pines, carrying the echo of wolf howls, spectral and eternal. The mountain had judged and Aya had passed, but the true journey, the ongoing balance between human desire, spiritual power, and nature's will, was only beginning. The pups padded beside her, each step deliberate, loyal, and courageous. Together, they descended from the sacred cavern into a world that would never be the same, forever shaped by the lessons of the mountain, the presence of Waya, and the unbreakable bonds of trust, instinct, and compassion. The first light of dawn spilled over Ash Hollow, painting the snow-dusted pines in shades of rose and gold. The forest was quiet, almost reverent, as if it had held its breath through the trials of the past weeks. Aya stepped onto the ridge above her cabin, the wind tugging at her coat, carrying with it scents of pine, frost, and something older, something eternal. She watched the valley below, the creek glinting like silver in the morning sun, and felt the stillness settle into her bones. Beside her, the pups, Ahuli, Chenoa, and Kitchi, moved with quiet confidence, their eyes scanning the forest, ears twitching at sounds imperceptible to human ears. They were no longer the fragile, starving creatures she had rescued months ago. Their muscles were strong, their movements precise, and their presence carried a silent intelligence that spoke of Waya's guidance and the mountain's spiritual energy flowing through them. Aya inhaled, tasting the cold, crisp air, and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She had survived the descent into the sacred cavern. She had met Waya, confronted the transformed wolves, and navigated a path that balanced fear, respect, and compassion. Yet she knew the trials were not entirely over. Ash Hollow, ancient and alive, demanded vigilance and careful stewardship. The mountain had granted her its trust, and that trust came with responsibility. Inside the cabin, Makia Keita was carefully cataloguing samples and reviewing notes. Despite the scientific instruments and data readouts, her eyes glimmered with awe, occasionally flicking toward the pups and the forest beyond the window. The readings confirmed what Aya had felt. The energy beneath the mountain was extraordinary, altering genetic structures, enhancing cognition, and manifesting in subtle environmental shifts. But more than science, Makia had seen the undeniable intelligence of Waya and the transformed wolves. "I've never seen anything like this," Makia said, setting down her tablet. "Even if I could publish these findings, no journal could fully capture what we've witnessed. And truthfully, I'm not sure I want to. Some knowledge is sacred, not public." Aya nodded. "The mountain chooses who can bear its secrets. We're part of that for now. But it's not ours to exploit." Toma Wikasa, standing near the fireplace, his arms crossed, gave a small, approving nod. "I've been a skeptic most of my life. I've seen strange things, sure, but this is something else. I get why you felt drawn here, Aya, and I understand why the mountain trusts you now. But the town, people need guidance, not fear. Balance is the key," Aya smiled faintly. "Balance. That's what we're building." She turned to the pups, kneeling to let Ahuli press against her side. "You three have grown so much. You're strong, you're ready for what comes next." Chenoa tilted her head, eyes locking with Aya's. It was a gaze filled with recognition, intelligence, and an unspoken promise. "We will protect, and we will learn." Kitchi circled, tail high, guarding her as always. Aya's heart swelled with love and quiet pride. Over the following days, Aya worked to establish routines that maintained the harmony between the wolves and the human community. Livestock enclosures were reinforced, and she left offerings of food and respect at the forest's edge, gestures that Waya had subtly guided her to perform. The mountain's spiritual energy seemed to respond, subtle shifts in the wind and the movement of shadows signaling approval. The town of Ash Hollow, cautious but observant, began to notice the changes. Disappearances of livestock had halted, strange sightings were less frequent, and reports of odd sounds in the night were replaced by sightings of the pups playing near the tree line. bold yet respectful, curious yet never threatening. Sheriff Toma convened a meeting with local farmers and townspeople. Aya stood beside him, speaking quietly but firmly. The wolves are not dangerous if treated with respect. They are intelligent, guided by forces older than any of us, and they can coexist with humans. Fear will only invite conflict. Compassion, understanding, and caution are our allies. One elderly farmer, who had once chased off wild wolves with a shotgun, raised an eyebrow. "And you expect us to just let them be?" Aya met his gaze steadily. "Not just let them be. Learn from them. Respect them. They are part of this land, as much as the creek, the pines, or the snow. Coexistence is possible if we honor what we don't fully understand." A hush fell over the room. Jamar gave her a subtle nod, and the farmer slowly lowered his gaze, understanding dawning. Makia spent long hours near the pups, observing and recording. Ahuli had become a leader among them, bold and inquisitive, often guiding the others in play and exploration. Genoa displayed extraordinary problem-solving skills, opening latches and understanding mechanisms far beyond ordinary wolves. Kichi remained steadfast, protective, and loyal, a living guardian. Makia's data suggested that the spiritual energy had accelerated their growth, enhancing both intelligence and physical ability. Yet the pups retained their core instincts, their connection to Aya, and their capacity for empathy. She marveled at the blending of science and spirituality, the tangible and the mystical entwined in ways she had never imagined possible. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the western ridge, casting long shadows across the snow, Aya sat outside her cabin. The pups played nearby, their silhouettes outlined by the fading light. A soft wind rustled the pines, carrying whispers of Waya and the mountain. Aya felt a profound connection, past, present, and future intertwined. Then, in a fleeting moment, she saw him, Takoda, his form translucent, shimmering in the twilight. He smiled, eyes filled with pride and love. "You've done well, Aya. You've balanced compassion and courage. You've honored the past and protected what is innocent." Tears pricked at Aya's eyes. "I missed you," she whispered. "Every day." His presence radiated warmth, calm, and reassurance. "You're not alone. I am part of you, part of this land. The mountain has taught you what you needed to know. Now live with it. Protect it. Be the guardian." And then he was gone, leaving only the quiet wind and the distant howl of Waya, a sound both warning and blessing. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of life in Ash Hollow settled into a fragile harmony. The pups explored farther under Aya's watchful eyes, often disappearing into the forest for hours before returning, tails high and eyes bright. Makia's research became a careful blend of observation and reverence, notes written not just for science, but as documentation of something sacred. The townspeople grew accustomed to the presence of the wolves, curiosity gradually replacing fear. Children watched the pups play from a safe distance, farmers adjusted their livestock routines, and Sheriff Toma continued to mediate, balancing law, community safety, and respect for the mountain. Iya became a quiet guide, a bridge between the spiritual and the human, the past and the present. One evening, Aya led the pups to the ridge above the valley, where the cavern's mouth glimmered faintly in the distance. The snow crunched underfoot, cold biting at her cheeks. She knelt, letting the pups surround her, tails brushing against her coat. "You've changed me," she whispered. "You've shown me courage, wisdom, and love I thought I had lost. I will protect you, and you will protect the mountain. Together, we'll honor what is here, what was lost, and what must endure." Ahuli nudged her hand. Chenoa pressed her head against her shoulder, and Kichi sat alert but calm. The bond was unspoken, deep and eternal. As night fell, the stars glittered above Ash Hollow, uncountable and timeless. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the echoes of ancient spirits, the lessons of the transformed wolves, and the howl of Waya far in the mountains. Aya watched the pups sleep, their chests rising and falling in steady rhythm, and allowed herself to feel peace, a rare and precious calm. Makia approached quietly, placing a hand on Aya's shoulder. You've done something remarkable here, Aya. Not just saving them, but creating a balance. Most people would never understand. Aya shook her head slightly. Maybe, but that's okay. It's not about understanding. It's about respect and being willing to carry the responsibility. Toma joined them, his usual stoicism softened by the glow of the firelight and the quiet night. I get it now. The mountain, the wolves. You've shown us all a path. Not without risk, not without cost, but the right one. Aya nodded, looking down at the pups once more. We'll continue to learn, together, and we'll protect Ash Hollow no matter what comes. From deep in the woods, a howl answered her words, a sound that was both a warning and a benediction. Waya's presence, eternal and watchful, acknowledged the fragile harmony now in place. Aya felt it resonate through her, a reminder that the mountain was alive, aware and ever-present. In the quiet, as snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, Tayanita understood fully. She had crossed the threshold between human and spiritual, between grief and hope, between fear and courage. And she had emerged not just as a survivor, but as a guardian, a protector of life, spirit, and the delicate balance of Ash Hollow. The pups stirred, eyes gleaming in the starlight. Aya smiled, standing tall, her breath fogging in the cold air. Together, they would face whatever the future held, guided by the wisdom of Waya, the lessons of the mountain, and the bonds of trust and compassion that could never be broken. And Ash Hollow, ancient and alive, exhaled once more at peace for the first time in decades. Under the watchful care of those who truly understood it, the morning sun broke over Ash Hollow like a promise, casting long fingers of light across the frozen creek and the thick pines lining the valley. Aya stood at the edge of her cabin's clearing, observing the pups as they ran through the snow, their tracks marking the land with patterns both playful and deliberate. A huli darted ahead, bold and fearless. Chenoa lingered near the trees, analyzing each branch and mound with meticulous care, while Kichi remained steadfast, circling and scanning, an ever-watchful sentinel. Aya's heart swelled with pride. The pups were thriving, their strength and intelligence now undeniable, their bond with her absolute. Though the immediate dangers had passed, Aya knew that vigilance was necessary. The mountain was alive in ways humans could never fully understand, and Waya's presence reminded her that harmony was delicate. It was not enough to survive the trials. They had to respect, protect, and coexist. The valley of Ash Hollow stretched beneath a pale winter sun, every ridge and hollow softened by fresh snow. Aya stood atop the familiar ridge overlooking the frozen creek, where she had first found Ahuli, Chenoa, and Kichi as fragile, starving pups. Now they moved with a strength and confidence that reflected months of growth, learning, and survival. Each paw print in the snow told a story of trials endured, instincts honed, and lessons absorbed. Ahuli bounded ahead, curious and bold, testing the edges of the forest. Chenoa, ever watchful and deliberate, paused to examine tracks and scents, analyzing her surroundings with a near-human precision. Kichi remained close to Aya, protective and loyal, her amber eyes reflecting the deep bond they shared. Aya's gaze softened as she watched them, her heart swelling with pride and relief. They were no longer vulnerable. They were her pupils, her companions, and her responsibility. Toma approached silently, carrying a steaming thermos, the aroma of coffee blending with the crisp mountain air. "They've changed this valley," he said, nodding toward the wolves. "People are starting to understand. Ash Hollow isn't something you conquer. You respect it, or you fail." Aya nodded, drawing in a long breath. "It's taken months to see it clearly. The valley, the wolves, even the townspeople, they're finding a fragile harmony. It's delicate, but real." She could feel the energy of the mountain pulsing beneath her feet, steady and enduring, as if the land itself was acknowledging the balance they had achieved. Makia arrived behind him, notebook clutched in one hand, snowflakes melting in her hair. She knelt beside Chenoa, offering a gentle hand. "Their behavior confirms everything we've suspected. Intelligence beyond ordinary wolves. cooperation with humans, and a deep awareness of their environment. I've never seen anything like it. Aya allowed herself a faint smile, feeling the weight of her journey lift slightly. She had begun as a recluse, haunted by grief, guilt, and loss. Now she was a guardian, not just of the pups, but of the fragile balance between human and wild, past and present, seen and unseen. A soft shimmer of light in the distant tree line drew her attention. Aya, the spirit alpha, lingered at the forest's edge. Though invisible to most, Aya felt the presence as a gentle pressure in her chest, a heartbeat that resonated with the rhythm of the land. It was a silent acknowledgement, a blessing, a promise that the valley was safe. So long as respect and care endured, the wolves moved together in a synchronized rhythm, their movements reflecting instinct, intelligence, and an almost spiritual awareness. Aya followed their path, marveling at their grace and power. She realized she was no longer just a witness to life in Ash Hollow. She was an active participant, a protector of its secrets. Entrusted with the continuation of its story, the wind carried the wolves' howls across the valley, soft and haunting. It was a song of survival, of knowledge passed down through generations, of a world that existed beyond human comprehension. Aya whispered to the wolves, her voice steady and full of reverence. Watch, learn, protect. This is your home, and ours is to honor it. Toma and Makia exchanged glances, a shared understanding passing between them. The community would remember the lessons of Ash Hollow, not as tales of fear or dominance, but as stories of respect, coexistence, and the strength that comes from listening to the land and its creatures. Aya closed her eyes for a moment, feeling Takoda's presence in the gentle breeze, in the rustle of branches, and in the quiet strength of the wolves. "We've made it," she whispered. "We've found the balance." In that moment, Ash Hollow stood eternal, untamed, mysterious, and sacred. Aya, the wolves, and the mountain itself were bound together, each a keeper of the other's secrets. Life in the valley would continue, shaped by memory, spirit, and the choices of those who understood the cost and the reward of compassion. As the sun dipped behind the distant peaks, casting long shadows across the snow, Aya felt a profound peace. She had lost and she had loved, she had feared and she had triumphed. And now, in the quiet strength of Ash Hollow, she had found her true purpose. The legacy of the wolves, the mountain, and the humans who honored them was secure. For as long as there were watchers, silent, vigilant, and respectful, the balance would endure. And Aya, once a solitary wanderer, would remain its guardian, standing watch over a world where the lines between nature, spirit, and humanity had been tested, challenged, and ultimately reconciled. Get why you felt drawn here, Aya, and I understand why the mountain trusts you now. But the town, people need guidance, not fear. Balance is the key, Aya smiled faintly. Balance. That's what we're building. She turned to the pups, kneeling to let Ahuli press against her side. You three have grown so much. You're strong, you're ready for what comes next. Chenoa tilted her head, eyes locking with Aya's. It was a gaze filled with recognition, intelligence, and an unspoken promise. We will protect, and we will learn. Kitchi circled, tail high, guarding her as always. Aya's heart swelled with love and quiet pride. Over the following days, Aya worked to establish routines that maintained the harmony between the wolves and the human community. Livestock enclosures were reinforced, and she left offerings of food and respect at the forest's edge, gestures that Aya had subtly guided her to perform. The mountain's spiritual energy seemed to respond, subtle shifts in the wind and the movement of shadows signaling approval. The town of Ash Hollow, cautious but observant, began to notice the changes. Disappearances of livestock had halted, strange sightings were less frequent, and reports of odd sounds in the night were replaced by sightings of the pups playing near the tree line, bold yet respectful, curious yet never threatening. Sheriff Toma convened a meeting with local farmers and townspeople. Aya stood beside him, speaking quietly but firmly. The wolves are not dangerous if treated with respect. They are intelligent, guided by forces older than any of us, and they can coexist with humans. Fear will only invite conflict. Compassion, understanding, and caution are our allies. One elderly farmer, who had once chased off wild wolves with a shotgun, raised an eyebrow. "And you expect us to just let them be?" Aya met his gaze steadily. "Not just let them be. Learn from them. Respect them. They are part of this land, as much as the creek, the pines, or the snow. Coexistence is possible if we honor what we don't fully understand." A hush fell over the room. Jamar gave her a subtle nod, and the farmer slowly lowered his gaze, understanding dawning. Makia spent long hours near the pups, observing and recording. Ahuli had become a leader among them, bold and inquisitive, often guiding the others in play and exploration. Genoa displayed extraordinary problem-solving skills, opening latches and understanding mechanisms far beyond ordinary wolves. Kichi remained steadfast, protective, and loyal, a living guardian. Makia's data suggested that the spiritual energy had accelerated their growth, enhancing both intelligence and physical ability. Yet the pups retained their core instincts, their connection to Aya, and their capacity for empathy. She marveled at the blending of science and spirituality, the tangible and the mystical entwined in ways she had never imagined possible. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the western ridge, casting long shadows across the snow, Aya sat outside her cabin. The pups played nearby, their silhouettes outlined by the fading light. A soft wind rustled the pines, carrying whispers of Wire and the mountain. Aya felt a profound connection, past, present, and future intertwined. Then, in a fleeting moment, she saw him, Takoda, his form translucent, shimmering in the twilight. He smiled, eyes filled with pride and love. "You've done well, Aya. You've balanced compassion and courage. You've honored the past and protected what is innocent." Tears pricked at Aya's eyes. "I missed you," she whispered. "Every day." His presence radiated warmth, calm, and reassurance. "You're not alone. I am part of you, part of this land. The mountain has taught you what you needed to know. Now live with it. Protect it. Be the guardian." And then he was gone, leaving only the quiet wind and the distant howl of Wire, a sound both warning and blessing. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of life in Ash Hollow settled into a fragile harmony. The pups explored farther under Aya's watchful eyes, often disappearing into the forest for hours before returning, tails high and eyes bright. Makia's research became a careful blend of observation and reverence, notes written not just for science, but as documentation of something sacred. The townspeople grew accustomed to the presence of the wolves, curiosity gradually replacing fear. Children watched the pups play from a safe distance, farmers adjusted their livestock routines, and Sheriff Toma continued to mediate, balancing law, community safety, and respect for the mountain. Iya became a quiet guide, a bridge between the spiritual and the human, the past and the present. One evening, Aya led the pups to the ridge above the valley, where the cavern's mouth glimmered faintly in the distance. The snow crunched underfoot, cold biting at her cheeks. She knelt, letting the pups surround her, tails brushing against her coat. "You've changed me," she whispered. "You've shown me courage, wisdom, and love I thought I had lost. I will protect you, and you will protect the mountain. Together, we'll honor what is here, what was lost, and what must endure." Ahuli nudged her hand, Chenoa pressed her head against her shoulder, and Kichi sat alert but calm. The bond was unspoken, deep and eternal. As night fell, the stars glittered above Ash Hollow, uncountable and timeless. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the echoes of ancient spirits, the lessons of the transformed wolves, and the howl of Wire far in the mountains. Aya watched the pups sleep, their chests rising and falling in steady rhythm, and allowed herself to feel peace, a rare and precious calm. Makia approached quietly, placing a hand on Aya's shoulder. "You've done something remarkable here, Aya, not just saving them, but creating a balance. Most people would never understand." Aya shook her head slightly. "Maybe, but that's okay. It's not about understanding. It's about respect and being willing to carry the responsibility. Toma joined them, his usual stoicism softened by the glow of the firelight and the quiet night. "I get it now. The mountain, the wolves. You've shown us all a path. Not without risk, not without cost, but the right one." Aya nodded, looking down at the pups once more. "We'll continue to learn, together, and we'll protect Ash Hollow no matter what comes." From deep in the woods, a howl answered her words, a sound that was both a warning and a benediction. Waya's presence, eternal and watchful, acknowledged the fragile harmony now in place. Aya felt it resonate through her, a reminder that the mountain was alive, aware and ever-present. In the quiet, as snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, Tayanita understood fully. She had crossed the threshold between human and spiritual, between grief and hope, between fear and courage. And she had emerged not just as a survivor, but as a guardian, a protector of life, spirit, and the delicate balance of Ash Hollow. The pups stirred, eyes gleaming in the starlight. Aya smiled, standing tall, her breath fogging in the cold air. Together, they would face whatever the future held, guided by the wisdom of Waya, the lessons of the mountain, and the bonds of trust and compassion that could never be broken. And Ash Hollow, ancient and alive, exhaled once more at peace for the first time in decades. Under the watchful care of those who truly understood it, the morning sun broke over Ash Hollow like a promise, casting long fingers of light across the frozen creek and the thick pines lining the valley. Aya stood at the edge of her cabin's clearing, observing the pups as they ran through the snow, their tracks marking the land with patterns both playful and deliberate. A huli darted ahead, bold and fearless. Chenoa lingered near the trees, analyzing each branch and mound with meticulous care, while Kichi remained steadfast, circling and scanning, an ever-watchful sentinel. Aya's heart swelled with pride. The pups were thriving, their strength and intelligence now undeniable, their bond with her absolute. Though the immediate dangers had passed, Aya knew that vigilance was necessary. The mountain was alive in ways humans could never fully understand, and Waya's presence reminded her that harmony was delicate. It was not enough to survive the trials. They had to respect, protect, and coexist.